Doc Slab Audio on music production and audio engineering. Welcome to Doc Slab Audio and our Insights series. I do believe this is the 22nd video in our Insights series, and in this video we want to talk about volume and frequency modulation issues. So first and foremost, that a lot of times whenever I'm talking about capturing, I always talk about how important it is about performance and getting a good capture of a really good performance done really well, how important that is and how you can't really fix that sometimes in some situations in some areas. And this is a prime example of one of those areas of how difficult it is to deal with some of these issues. So the first thing you want to understand is the concept of volume and frequency modulations is pretty simple. You're getting a rise and a drop in decibel levels and in frequency levels or frequencies, and that can be either rapid or in a quick change, or it can be a glide of some type, and most time it's worked out some type of a modulation that's slowly wavering around is normally the biggest problematic issues when you're dealing with that. So when we start dealing with that, I've heard so many times people trying to ask me about their productions, and in a lot of areas that the frequency and volume modulations are an issue because it's really unnatural, when they're working with any instrument, or the vocalist or the guitarist or the bass player or whatever they're doing, that it's lacking in that area that makes it sound very sterile and not like a really good performance, that's causing them to really not come out with this production that sounds like this powerful production of really good performances that they're hoping for. Now when we get into the DAW and we look at this, like we got this right here, and we see volume modulations to some point, right? We're seeing volume and decibel level changes all over the place. Does that make sense? So that's the first place we have to look at it. And really understanding whenever there is changes happening, that sometimes it's really wavering and moving around. A really good place to see this is in something like Melodyne and looking at frequency modulations, because then the concept hits home a little bit more of what is happening, because it's like, okay, let's take this right here. You've got this note right here, right? Now this is the basic note that is happening. Now this can be like targeting a basic volume, is when we're dealing with the performance also, that you have this set level you're trying to hit, but you might be wavering up and down in front of that, around that, just like, and this is the target note, but this is what's actually happening in the frequencies. It's actually wavering around quite a bit during the performance, all over the place. Does that make sense? And it's a huge component in your productions, volume and frequency modulations, and they don't work that differently from each other. They're just in different domains, but they still happen, and they work together and work against each other sometimes in all kinds of areas, trying to accomplish a really good performance. And it can be very much a determining factor of when you have a really good performer and not, of how they utilize volume and frequency modulations during performances. Where you have the written music, it's just sterile written music, right? And when you write notes in MIDI, it's just sterile written music. There is not a whole lot of that going on sometimes that's controlled by you. And so trying to understand that so that you can work out when you're dealing with performance, like say on a guitar or a vocalist, that they're really focusing on the areas and very much controlling those areas and being proficient in those areas. And whenever you're working with VST instruments or any other instrument there is no control factor there, that trying to find a way to utilize them. The modulation thing on your keyboard, volume and frequency modulations, getting really performers and yourself, if you're producing, utilizing them, because it is unimaginably a huge component in the performance to make it sound as good as possible, like it's a really good performer. Like this note, this is a target note here, but look at all these frequency modulations happening. Remember when we looked at the sound wave and we looked at like the basic cycle and then little mini cycles all over the place? It's the same kind of concept, and sometimes it gets really super complex for really good performances to sound really good and to sound really professional. And so it's something you really want to take into consideration. It's something I highly recommend you make a study of, and something you definitely need to think about in your productions. So whenever you're dealing with any instrument and any performance and any production, that the frequency and volume modulations that happen when the vocalist is singing, when the guitarist is playing, things that you're going to have to do whenever you're working with violin VSTs or pad VSTs or any other instruments that you might be working with MIDI information, incorporating volume and frequency modulations in there and really getting proficient at doing it, or helping the people you're working with get there and understand that, is monumental. Because if I just sing this note here and this note here, rather than all these volume and frequency modulations to be happening, because this is the frequency domain, but this stuff is still happening in the volume domain also, because when you look at it in the DAW, you have that same thing going on. Look at the difference. It's wavering all over the place. Up, down, down, up, down, up, down, up, everywhere, all over the place. One word, you got all these volume and frequency modulations, and in a really good performance, because that wasn't exactly a really good performance, it is unimaginable how much that impacts the power of the production and the quality of the production. That we talked about this before. You get in there trying to edit every one of these cycles and the mini cycles inside of them to make it sound like a really good performance is ridiculous. I mean, that is ridiculous, not going to happen. And the same thing in here. The more I zoom in on this, you look at, and in Melodyne here, it's given a pretty smooth view of that, in my humble opinion, but still it's unimaginable all the frequency modulations happening there, the same as you're looking at the volume modulations working together and against each other. And it's mind-bogglingly complex, because even with this vocal, you've got saturation, you've got noise, you've got harmonic content, you've got harmonic distortion, all interweaving together, that's working differently at different frequency and volume modulations to cause that sound. What, bro? That is mind-bogglingly complex, and all of them a little bit differently during a performance. And there's no way to pull a sound apart and go, well, I just want to mess with, the saturation volume modulations, or the distortion modulations, or the noise saturation modulations, or what? And it's just as complicated with the volume and the frequency domain. So the bottom line is you can do only so much in the DAW with the volume modulations, and in something like Melodyne with frequency modulations. But it really is going to boil down to you're going to be much better off focused on good performances of individuals who can understand this concept, and you can school them in a little bit to help them, or in your own productions really focus in that area. Because it is, some people they don't really understand the powerful impact that has on the production in all those areas that the transducer producers, noise, saturation, distortion, harmonic content, all kinds of things acting a little bit differently when all that stuff is going on. It's complicated. And so You can only address it so much with something like Melodyne or the DAW, but still you can fix major issues, but you really have to fall back a little bit and go, I can be a great engineer and do magic. But this stuff, the magic's got to come from the performer. I have to help the performer. I have to be that performer. I have to make sure that happens. That's part of my job as a producer and an engineer, to really understand this concept and how complicated it is. And like I said, I do not dissuade you from researching and studying about it a lot, because it's a very powerful component that can make or break your production, to where you're messing around, you're going, it just doesn't sound right. Like, I've done everything right and it doesn't sound right. You're having problems with your frequency and volume modulation area in that domain that is causing you a problem that you're not going to probably be able to rectify with editing or some, processor or something like that. You really need to step back and go, this can't fall on me. I need to understand this, and I need to address this issue as a producer and as an engineer to make sure this is happening, so that I can do magic with magical performances. Does that make sense? Because it all falls down to you need a magical production and composition, a magical performance, a magical capture, and then magical engineering. All those areas, it's got to be top notch to make that top notch production happen. And this is one of those areas that's very frustrating and very difficult to deal with, because you get one performer that's excellent. He's a guitarist and he's just excellent. His modulations and his volume and frequency modulations are just dead on. It's just beautiful when he works the guitar. Bob, not so much. And you just, his production's never going to come out sounding that level because of his performances and his understanding of even this one area, how important it is and what kind of impact it's going to have on the production as a whole. Does that make sense? It's like saying, I've got this brown color that I'm going to keep polish on. It's always going to be the same brown color. It's never going to be this beautiful opal brown that's just, multifaceted, saturation, distortion, noise, frequency, volume modulation. It's just beautiful and weaving and it's not going to happen unless it happens there in the performance, right? So you really need to take that into consideration, and it's one of those things that way you don't kick yourself around about it as an engineer when you're going, all this stuff should be happening, but it's not. What can I do about that? Or you're looking at this, all that stuff should be happening in the decibel domain, but it's not. And so you can't kick yourself around and thinking you're supposed to fix every one of these cycles here, or you're supposed to get into Melodyne and fix every one of these things. It ain't going right there. You don't have no wavering. I need to do this all day long, all the way across in the areas. You might as well learn to be the vocalist or the guitarist yourself, because you're not. It would be easier for you to redo it yourself on the guitar than trying to fix it like that, right? So that's a huge concept you get in your head, and a study that I really do recommend you undertake to become a really good producer and a good artist and a good engineer. So peace, hope, love. I certainly hope you enjoyed our next video in our Insight series, and I will see you in the next video.